Hey, this is John Paul Mendocha of It's a Paul World, and we have a very special guest today. We have Michael Shermer, and Michael Shermer is going to talk about his new book that's out and also talk about what he's going to be doing at FreedomFest. And I'm really excited to hear about both of those things. So I just want to welcome Michael onto the show. Michael, thank you for coming on.
Nice to see you. It'll be nice to meet you in person in FreedomFest.
So talk about your new book that you've got coming out. Sounds like an interesting title, and show it to us all.
Oh, well, here's the book. There's the cover, Giving the Devil His Due, with the little chess piece and his alter ego, which is the devil. So it's really a collection of essays, mostly focused on free speech and free thought, and the kind of the scientific model for open debate and disputation as the best way to get to the truth about things. Since none of us are omniscient, we need to engage with other people about our ideas. And the only way to do that is through speech, through talking, writing. And the only way to do that is to allow people to do it without punishment. So that's kind of the central theme. And the devil is whoever disagrees with you. And the reason that person should be given their due is because, what happens if you're the person that the majority disagrees with, and you've already signed off on censorship as a legitimate restrictions on speech, and then your voice will not be heard. So for your own safety's sake, for your own freedom's sake, you should tolerate the speech of others, especially those with whom you disagree. And so there's two forms of this kind of censoriousness. There's top-down government censorship of free speech, which is largely protected by the First Amendment. And the trend for the last 2 centuries has been to protect more and more speech, not just speech, but also actions, music, artistic expression, and so on, protests, flag burning, and whatnot. The Supreme Court tends to support those cases as forms of expression. And the people that are against it, of course, are always the ones that claim to be in favor of free speech, unless they disagree with it or they don't like it, or they make some argument that it's bad for the nation or the culture if these ideas or this speech is expressed. And so this is why we have to enforce it, because even conservatives are only too glad to censor people's speech if it's against their team or they don't happen to like it. So one reason I wrote this book now is because now it's conservatives that are defending free speech against liberals who used to traditionally be in favor of defending free speech. And so you only have to harken back to the 80s and 90s when conservatives were all over rock music as being corruptive of the youth and destructive of the moral fabric of America, to the consternation of liberals who were defending that as a form of expression as speech. And now it's the opposite, cancel culture and the progressive left who want to censor speech that they equate with violence, actually physical violence, that words are exactly the same as physical violence, and therefore they can be met with not just censorship, but also violence if you feel like it. And and that's the threat that's always there. It doesn't matter what country it is. Even the freest of Western nations are only too happy to censor speech they don't like. So it's one of these never-ending eternal vigilance that we have to defend speech.
How did you get on this, into this area of interest and study and develop this keen insight? Where did that come from?
Well, a couple of sources. First, I'm pretty much a lifelong libertarian or classical liberal just by temperament. I feel people should be responsible for their actions and no excuses and, no victimhood. Life is hard. That's just the way it goes. And part of that is that you have to be able to speak your mind. And, I feel, pretty strongly about that just personally. But intellectually, I'm a scientist in the social sciences. There's a lot of issues that are pretty controversial. Like the first one I ran into in undergraduate psychology was the race and IQ controversy. And I noticed early on that there was censorship of scientists who were proclaiming the politically incorrect position on this issue, and they were censored. I mean, they were, we would call it today cancel culture. They were canceled by their students or universities or whatever. So, I caught on early on that even science is subject to these kinds of censorious actions. when corrupted by politics and ideology, and that operates in both directions, against the left and against the right. No one has a monopoly on that. Anyway, I'm a scientist by training. I publish this magazine called Skeptic. It's a quarterly publication that deals with scientific controversies of all kinds, and kind of the margins of science and pseudoscience and alternative medicine and cults and the paranormal, the supernatural, God and religion, and science and religion. And, we cover pretty much all of it. And again, the problem is, we're not omniscient. Nobody knows everything. And therefore, voices have to be allowed to be heard, no matter how fringy. Holocaust deniers should be, they should not be censored. Creationists not censored. Neo-Nazis, let them have their say. And this is who free speech is for. They are the devils. And even though particular ones I just rattled off, I'm pretty critical of. I debunked the Holocaust deniers. I wrote a whole book about them, and I can take apart their arguments, with half my brain tied behind my back. But I still don't think they should be censored. So one of the chapters I have in my book, I talk about defending David Irving, who is the most notorious of the Holocaust deniers. He was arrested at the airport in Vienna, Austria, for just showing up to give a talk. He didn't even give the talk. He didn't even get out of the airport. He was arrested at the airport because he was pretty notorious for this. So his passport was flagged, and he was hauled off to jail, and he was put on trial and was convicted for hate speech. And Holocaust denial is illegal in quite a few European countries, as well as Canada and New Zealand, Australia. And I find this just appalling. Even though I find their views appalling, I find the censorship of them appalling. I mean, here you're talking about David Irving arrested. So he didn't even give the talk. So it's a thought crime. That's pretty Orwellian.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. And here's the challenge for Orwell. He couldn't imagine where we would be today. He couldn't imagine with what goes on with especially social media, and how social media makes determinations about what is or is not allowed to be spoken about. And we're going to get a tribunal of people. It just kind of reminds me of some point before the Enlightenment happened, where you'd have a bunch of people who sat around and determined what was or wasn't true or not. And if you were on the wrong side of that line, look out, because it didn't work out for you that well. So talk about Skeptic magazine. That sounds exciting.
Well, Skeptic is the magazine of the Skeptic Society. We're a 501c3 nonprofit science education organization, started in 1992 by myself and my partner. And it's a quarterly publication. You can pick it up in every bookstore in North America, plus digital, of course. Everybody's made the transition to digital. And so every issue has a particular theme. Here we did one on the nature of reality. How do you know what's reality? And this is the new thing, drug trips, microdosing of LSD and ecstasy and other drugs as a treatment form for PTSD and other mental challenges that people have. But also, people that take a lot of these drugs claim that it opens the door to a different reality that's actually out there. So does it? So we have a discussion about that. Of course, we had to do one on QAnon, which is the latest conspiracy theory that astonishingly has been glommed onto by tens of millions of Republicans. Now, so an interesting question is, do Republicans really believe? About 30% of them say they believe it. Do a third of all Republicans really believe that there's a secret satanic cult of pedophiles that are drinking the blood of children out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., led by Hillary Clinton and Tom Hanks? Do they really believe this? Because they say they do. I find it difficult to think that anybody actually believes that. And yet they say that they do. So, here I have a discussion of what does it mean to believe something? And, here I think the conspiracy theory or particular belief is a stand-in. It's a proxy for some other truth. Like, right, we don't like Hillary. We don't like Democrats. We don't trust them. They're not just wrong in their policy on taxation or immigration or whatever. They're evil. They're evil people committing, not just moral crimes, but legal crimes, and they should be locked up, lock her up. And a lot of this has been driven by not just by Trump, but also by the kind of polarization of politics over the last 20 years, where, social media especially, but also starting with talk radio and then TV, it polarizes people so much. It's not just the other side is incorrect or wrong, or we think they have the wrong policy about, immigration rates or whatever, that they're bad people, they're evil, they should be destroyed. We should never talk to them because they're so evil. That I find to be very destructive. Back to where we started. Why should I talk to somebody who it's not just they disagree with me, but they're evil people? I shouldn't talk. I'm not talking to the devil. I'm not talking to evil people, right? And so that this is not good for for free speech.
Well, and it appears that we have more information available today, or more data. I don't know if it's information, but we have more data out there than ever before, but we have less discernment. We have less thinking about something. And what somebody does is they latch on to some small piece of this. It becomes we would call it a bumper sticker. Nobody puts on bumper stickers anymore, but they come up with a slogan, and that slogan becomes then has its life of its own, and then people start going, well, that's exactly what we're going to do, and that drives this point home. And it appears that when that happens, that we then start looking for a confirmation bias, which then tells us that we're right and all these other people are wrong, and therefore we stop having a conversation on all fronts. So therefore, they talk a lot about solved or science that has been, determined that it's all over and done. You're a scientist. I'm not a scientist, but I can tell you, I just find that astonishing because, what is settled science? I mean, if we had settled science, we would have followed, what was it, over 100 years ago, the guy who was running the patent office said, we might as well shut it down. Everything's been invented. Well, is there really, is there really settled science?
There's very little settled science. Most science is not settled. There's always some element of heretics that want to push back, and this is good, even though I think they're usually wrong, and that the consensus is usually right because of how the consensus was arrived at in the first place, which is if it's done through a diversity of viewpoints in which there's a marketplace of ideas, as we say in politics, but a kind of a competition, open peer dialogue and disputation in peer-reviewed journals and conferences. And the scientists themselves are very competitive. They hash it out. They try to debunk each other. It's a thick-skinned enterprise. There's a lot of anger there. There's a lot of emotions and passion over people's ideas. But out of that, emerges something that's closer to the truth because of that system. So the moment somebody says, well, the science is settled, we don't ever need to listen to heretics anymore, that's a risky position to take, because historically the majority have been wrong enough that it pays to pay attention. And, we've seen this play out in the last year and a half with the COVID-19 pandemic. Even the apparently omniscient Anthony Fauci, well, he's been wrong a lot. And it's not that, he's an ideologue or he's not smart enough or whatever. It's that nobody knows. Nobody knew. And so, people are just taking guesses. They're spitballing ideas. They're testing hypotheses. Let's try this. Let's try that. So this idea that, that social media companies are censoring people that talk about, different alternative treatments in different drug treatments, for example.
Right.
This is, who are they to tell me what I should read? Like the latest one, I forget the name of the drug that Brett Weinstein was talking about on his podcast. And, he got 2 strikes from YouTube for daring to talk about it, and his YouTube channel was demonetized. Well, Brett's a liberal. I mean, and politically, he's on the right page, according to social media companies, but he dared to, veer from the standard line that was supposedly settled science on the treatment of COVID-19. Well, this is not good. I mean, it's a drug. How can they tell me that I can't read about this drug? This is not good. And it probably won't work out, but maybe it will. Who's to say? Again, nobody knows. We don't know for sure.
Well,
We have
Michael, I can tell you that we're going to know all the answers about this current crisis. I can tell you precisely when that's going to happen. 2043.
Oh.
In 2043. we're going to be able to
Okay.
sit back. That's my prediction, 2043. So you and I can get together and, let's make it a Saturday morning. And 2043, we can then go piece through all the data that we will have accumulated and throw out that which is absurd. And we will now know what we should have done. I mean, this is the absurdity of people doing shotgun, run and gun shooting science, in my opinion, which is that people are trying to figure out what to do while we're in the midst of it. And to talk about it in absolutist terms, maybe you disagree with my assessment of 2043. Maybe you think we need more time than that. But in my experience, you need you need to have a perspective of time if you're going to actually go back and do that. Now, I'm not saying that you wait around to develop policies, but I just meet people who will get, spitting mad, if that's the right expression, about, well, they said masks are this, and then they said this, and they said, I'm like, they're making it up as they're going along, and they're and that's what they're doing.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, 2043, I think we'll probably know before then, but I hope you and I can do that show because I'll be 89, so that'll be good. I'll have made it that far. Well, so yeah, the problem is if it's easy for you and I to sit back and say they're just spitballing, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. But if you're in a position, if you're a politician, you're a policy analyst,
No.
if you're governor, you're mayor, and the public or the press comes to you and says, all right, what do we do? Should we wear masks or no? Do we social distance or not? Do we close the restaurants or keep them open? How many people in a restaurant? Tell us what we should do. And the politician or policy analyst can't just say, let's wait till 2043 to decide. It's like,
understand.
Yeah. So I have some sympathy, it's like, okay, I wouldn't want that job. And, but, they're in that position. So, my state, I'm in California, Newsom's coming up for re-elect. I mean, a recall election in September because, he fucked it up pretty bad. Sorry. I don't know if you
No, that's fine. No, that's good. That's fine.
And
that's the right technical expression for it.
Then he shuts down the restaurants and he gets caught at that super high price French restaurant, no social distancing, no masks. It's like, come on, if you're gonna be in that position, you can't also be a hypocrite, even though we're all hypocrites at some level. But anyway, so yeah, that's the problem. That science can get settled in time, more or less, but there's always room. I mean, there's Big Bang skeptics, there's evolution skeptics, there's people that are skeptical about this theory or that theory, climate skeptics, vaccine skeptics, and so on. I just say, let them have their voice. The moment the other problem of shutting people down is it makes outsiders think, they must be onto something. If the media wants to shut them down, the social media, the politicians want to shut them down, maybe they're onto something. What do you mean I can't read about that? Now I really want to read about it, right? So this is the danger. And of all places where this is happening is universities. Universities have always been the kind of bulwark of, in these buildings, you can say anything you want, and that it's open for all discussions. Not anymore.
Yeah. So, and what you're saying is that by curtailing or preventing or stopping, that you're elevating what may in fact be, quackery or untrue or whatever it is, just because you're not bringing it out and having an open discussion about it and talking about those things.
Yeah, like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, taking down QAnon conspiracy sites. So, this is one of my fields of study is conspiracy theories. It's my next big book. And, I want to read about these. I mean, of course, I'm skeptical of what they claim, but I want to read about it. I want these people that believe it. I want them to be free to write down and tell us what they're thinking. And I want to read what they're thinking. And we should know. And the idea that, Facebook has decided that I should not be reading these sites because why? Because I might, this might incite me to violence. Well, not me. Who's going to be incited to violence? Maybe somebody. But, this road you go down of like, this goes back to, so I opened the book with the 1919 Supreme Court justice case of Schenck versus the United States, in which Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes famously decided against Schenck. Schenck, I'll tell you who Schenck was in a minute, but here's the decision Justice Holmes made, and you'll recognize the passage. The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man in falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. So what was this clear and present danger to the United States? Who was this Charles Schenck? He was head of the Socialist Party in Philadelphia, and he was printing and handing out flyers against the draft as America was gearing up to go into the First World War. And he equated the draft conscription with slavery. It's a violation of the Constitution, 13th and 14th Amendments. Essentially, the government is saying for the next 2 years or 4 years, we own your body and we're going to send you over to die if that's what we decide. And Schenck was going, hey, that's unconstitutional. You can't do that. Right. Okay. Now, of course, you and I are used to debates about conscription because we went through the Vietnam War era. But at the time, that was a huge thing. And here, the United States Supreme Court decided we are not going to allow people to resist the draft. That is a clear and present danger to the United States. Really? Right. Astonishing. And so, but the moment you put that, you create that bin and say, in this bin are words that are going to constitute a clear and present danger, the equivalent of shouting fire in a crowded theater. Okay, then everything anybody says that I don't like, I can say, hey, that's a danger to the United States. We got to shut that guy down, right? That's the problem with that precedent. And so we have to have a very, very strict kind of limits on that. If somebody says, there's a mob outside the prison, yelling at the warden, let him out because we want to lynch him. And the prison guard goes, okay, come on in and burn down the prison and kill the prisoner because you don't like him. Okay, maybe that speech, maybe that would be a case of, okay, that's dangerous or something like that. But this is really rare. Historically, even Trump's speech that morning of January 6th, it has some effect on the crowd, I suppose, but it would be very difficult to convict him as one of the guilty parties of the insurrection that morning, just because of his words. And so therefore, I do think that those laws should be very, very carefully applied.
I agree with you. Well, this has been fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing at Freedom Fest. But before we do, I noticed over your shoulder a Saturn V rocket.
It's a Lego. It's a Lego build.
Yeah.
2,000 pieces. My 5-year-old and I built that, which means actually mostly I did it. it's actually really for adults. Yeah, no, it's a cool piece. But it's also I think kind of an icon of the power of humanity to accomplish, what we want if we put our minds to it.
Well, yeah, and I just had to mention it because growing up, I was very much into the space program and watching that and know all of those various things. I mean, I found when my father passed away, I found a scrapbook that he had kept in mind for Apollo 8. For those of you who don't know, right, Apollo 8, you have seen the photos from Apollo 8. And if you haven't, then you just haven't gone to many movies, because whenever they show that blue marble coming from around the moon, that was Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was the first time we ever went to the dark side of the moon. Had to say that because I saw that, love that.
It is cool. No, that was a special iconic moment. There's two of these. There's that one, and then there's the pale blue dot when Carl Sagan talked JPL into turning the Voyager spacecraft around, and when it was outside the orbit of Jupiter, and taking a picture of Earth, and or outside the orbit of Saturn, even further away. And there in the kind of the little stream of light from the sun is a little pale blue dot, and it constitutes 1 pixel on the camera, just 1 pixel, and as Carl says, everybody who ever lived on that dot. Every dictator, every autocrat, every president, every person in love, every athlete, every famous person, every celebrity, lived out their lives on that little dot. It's very humbling, because, the universe is not life friendly. It's mostly unfriendly. So we're lucky.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't understand how we are living in amazing times and having that. And, when you say Carl Sagan, I actually saw Carl Sagan live. My father took my brother and I to see him deliver speeches before he became famous and before he was talking about billions and billions. and we would make the trek, from Denver to Boulder, Colorado, and in the snow, didn't matter. He was dragging us to there and making sure that we got exposed to
Nice.
it. So I got to see Carl. I believe
Nice.
it was
That's
three
cool.
times, and it was quite an interesting. He knew how much I really love the idea of space. Well, let's talk about a certain space and time that we're going to be at, because we're both going to be at Freedom Fest. And the great part about being at Freedom Fest is you're going to meet very interesting people like Michael. And do not be skeptical, because you're going to meet some very fascinating people. And Michael clearly has a lot more to say. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing at Freedom Fest and why somebody should get on the road and get to Freedom Fest. Michael, what are you going to be talking about?
Well, I've always been fascinated by this because, in this kind of end of the political spectrum that we're on, if it even is a spectrum, there is no clear category. It's like libertarians, classical liberals, conservatives, free thinkers, atheists, believers that are libertarian, whatever. There's such a wide range of thinkers. It's hard to pigeonhole. I still have a hard time saying, well, who goes? Well, I don't know. Lots of people go of different persuasions, and therefore you see quite a wide variety of positions, which again, back to this kind of nature of reality. Nobody knows for sure what the answer is to say what's the correct immigration policy. And so, but even if you narrow it down to libertarians, they don't agree on on those issues, or war. Is there just war? I see libertarians all over the map. In a way that's very telling, even though we're supposedly all on the same page on, we believe in freedom. Yeah, but there's 100 different nuances on that, and so I find that's that's one of the fun things about going to Freedom Fest, is just seeing the wide variety of viewpoints.
Yeah, when I meet somebody, they ask me, well, John, you're a libertarian. What does that mean? I said, I have the equal opportunity to piss off both the right and the left simultaneously, which I think is quite an ability. So what are you going to be talking about at Freedom Fest? I mean, you're going to be talking about your book, but I know that so you have a session on your book.
Yes, I have a session on my book, and also I'm part of the mock trial on COVID-19 and pandemic, and should we have closed the economy sooner, later, not at all? What about masks? And so forth. And so that'll be those debates, those mock trials are always kind of fun. That Mark organizes, Mark Skousen. And then I'm doing a third thing. I think it's on science and technology. I forget exactly what the subject is, but I think it's like a panel discussion with different viewpoints on, I think it's on the future of science and technology. So anyway, look that up, come and check it out. It should be fun.
So if you haven't made your reservations, there's still time to do it. Come July 21st to the 24th, come to Freedom Fest in Rapid City, South Dakota. I'm going to tell you exactly how to get there. You don't even need Google Maps. Here's what you do. You have to locate Interstate 90. If you cannot do that, if you do not understand how the interstate system works in the United States, assuming you live here, go find your fourth grade teacher, get a refund. But what you do is you find Interstate 90. And what you realize is you have to know if you are to the east or the west of Rapid City, go the opposite direction depending upon where you're at. And Rapid City is the wide spot on the road in South Dakota on Interstate 90. Now, Michael, before I let you go, tell me what was the most interesting skeptical thing you guys have, because you've been doing this for a while. I mean, you would think you would have run out of things to be skeptical about.
Oh, no, it never ends. No, like the latest thing about UFOs and UAPs, and what does the Pentagon know? And the Navy has this video, and the Air Force has that video, and so on. What does it mean? Is it aliens? Is it Russian, Chinese drones that are, so far advanced of our technology? Our government is completely screwed up, and so on. And the answer is going to be very disappointing to people, that it's probably just weird camera effects and lens effects and optical illusions and things like this. But it's one of the more interesting questions, because of course, are we alone in the universe is one of the grand questions ever. But even if that turns out not to be true, it is important to know if there's some aircraft or drones or whatever entering our military airspace. We should know that. Okay, so to me, that's one of the more interesting questions. How do you? It gets down to, how do you analyze data? Everybody says they have data, so but what's the quality of the evidence you have? How do you evaluate evidence? So Learning how to think like a scientist. That's the subtitle of my course at Chapman University. I teach Skepticism 101 is the course, how to think like a scientist. Really, it's just how to evaluate any claim anybody makes about anything. So it's the application of rationality, reason, and science to any and all claims, economic, political, scientific, whatever, no sacred cows.
Excellent. So how does somebody get a hold of you? Let's say they're not going to make it to Freedom Fest.
Just
Boo
go
hiss. How they
to
do that?
skeptic.com, michaelshermer.com. Skeptic.com is the best avenue. My books are all on Amazon, of course, and you can find the Skeptic magazine itself. Here it is again at all fine bookstores in North America and online, of course.
Well, and of course, bookstores are almost becoming extinct, so you may want to go online and check out Michael today.
Right.
So my guest today has been Michael Shermer. We could probably continue this for quite some time. He's a fascinating guy. Hopefully you're going to go spend some time at Freedom Fest and check it out. The thing that I will tell you is that, Michael is a rather interesting guy. I didn't know what this was going to be like when you interview him. Learned some things today that I did not know, and that's always a good thing. So we'll see you at Freedom Fest. Thank you, Michael, for your time, and appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.